Many Americans recall a childhood spent collecting toys, trading friendship bracelets or baseball cards, and chasing friends around the playground. To be a child is to be unencumbered by grown-up worries, secure in the knowledge that all is well in the world because adults have everything under control. Or at least that's the hope. But in Selma, Alabama in 1965, that was not even close to the case for two young girls. On Sunday, March 7th of that year, 8-year-old Cheyenne Webb, there in the center of this photo, and 11-year-old Joanne Bland, the taller girl towards the right, went out to march with 600 others in a civil rights demonstration that was ultimately met with violence in what would become known as Bloody Sunday. That event shocked the national conscience and helped lead the nation to the passage of the Voting Rights Act of 1965. On the morning of the planned march, 8-year-old Cheyenne left a short note to her parents. She was sorry for disobeying them, but she had to go that day. She recalls writing, quote, "I am marching for our freedom." Unbeknownst to her mom and dad, Cheyenne had, in fact, been sneaking out of the house for nearly 2 months, spending hours at a local church to hear civil rights leaders, including Dr. Martin Luther King, discuss African-American struggle for freedom. When she showed up at the church that Bloody Sunday morning, adults tried to dissuade her from marching, but she would have none of it. As the youngest participant that day, she became known as Dr. King's smallest freedom fighter. That same morning, 11-year-old Joanne also headed to the march with her big sister, Linda. As demonstrators began their march toward the nearby Edmund Pettus Bridge, the two little girls followed along even as angry white locals spat at them. Up ahead, they could see officers on horseback with dogs and tear gas gathered before them, waiting at the bridge with batons for marchers to catch up. Recalling the moment, the violence began to unfold. Cheyenne says, quote, "The dogs began to push their way into the crowds as if we weren't human beings." Meanwhile, Joanne remembers being arrested that day, and she said she had been arrested close to a dozen times in total before that fateful day. The course of American history underwent a major shift that afternoon, one felt by Americans across the nation as footage of the brutal attack was broadcast on national television. Cheyenne and Joanne are just two of a handful of remaining people alive today who were directly involved in that historic march. They will go on to participate in several more marches and to become civil rights activists themselves. Cheyenne Webb, Christberg, and Joanne Bland join me now as their hometown, Selma, Alabama, prepares to commemorate 58 years since that brutal attack on Bloody Sunday. Cheyenne is founder of Keep Productions and author of the book Selma, Lord Selma, Girlhood Memories of the Civil Rights Days. And Joanne is co-founder of the National Voting Rights Museum and is the tour director for Journeys for the Soul. Welcome to you both. Been looking forward to this conversation. Cheyenne, what compelled you at that young age? I mean, what did you sense and know about that moment in time that got you that involved, that made you and compelled you to go out and risk being a part of that march as the adults around you told you, don't go, don't do this, and yet you saw the moment and leaned into it?
Most certainly. First and foremost, after having met Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. for the first time, he struck a chord with me and became very special to me based upon the conversations and the attention that was given to me as he had come to Selma with his entourage to have a strategy meeting. And since that time of having met Dr. Martin Luther King, he raised my consciousness in a very, very unique way. And I just became a disobedient child. My parents couldn't do anything with me. They just couldn't do anything with me. And I remember going home after meeting Dr. King on that particular day, and I told my parents that I had met him, and my dad said to me, "You just better stay from around that mess." And I didn't quite understand that, because to me, as that little girl, I had met this special man.
You know, it's interesting, Joanne, because Cheyenne raises an interesting point that, you know, a lot of folks were like, don't push it, don't get involved, right? You went to the march with your sister. What compelled you and her to sort of get outside of those restrictions and be a part of the movement?
Well, my grandmother Sylvia Johnson was really our impetus. You know, my mom died when I was 3 years old, and grandmother came to live with us, so to help rear us. And grandmother had lived in Detroit, so she shared some freedoms that we didn't have in the segregated South. So she decided that she should speak up, and then they introduced her to Mrs. Boynton, and we became involved. But I didn't understand at that time how the relationship between voting, how it would affect my life. I wanted to sit at a lunch counter here, and grandmother said I couldn't. But she told me when we get our freedom, we could sit at that counter. So I became a freedom fighter when I was 8. I was 8 years old. I went to my first mass meeting. In fact, that was the first time I was arrested when I was 8 years old, along with my grandmother and her friends.
It's just an amazing story. And Cheyenne, you know, I'm just really curious, what is your thinking? What's your state of mind when you got back home that afternoon after the attack? And how did your parents respond?
Well, after having experienced the most traumatic experience of my life, being the youngest participant on that Bloody Sunday March, it was a traumatic experience, very, very devastating. Particularly being a child, it was devastating, you know, for the adults, the courageous foot soldiers and freedom fighters. So definitely, it was very devastating for me. And I remember running home and trying to make my way home that day from that experience. And the late Hosea Williams picked me up, and my eyes were burning from the tear gas, and my little feet were still galloping in his arms. And I turned to him, said to him in my childish voice, "Put me down, because you are not running fast enough." And I did get home, and both my parents were standing in the door, and my dad had his shotgun, and they were there as if they were waiting for their child to come home. And I completely ran up the stairs to my room, and they came behind to comfort me. And that's when I really understood and reflected on that freedom song that we so often used to sing at mass meetings. Oh, freedom over me, over me. And before I be a slave, I'll be buried in my grave and go home to my Lord and be free. And that's when I started writing my funeral arrangements in my own childish way.
Put me down. You're not running fast enough. Joanne, it just, events like this shape people. How have you been shaped and moved after that moment in time to be and do what you do today?
You know, Michael, one of the things that was not done for us, this was a traumatic experience, as Shai said, that no one came to talk to us, no counselors, no psychiatrists. Life just went on as if it was just another day. So we did internalize a lot. And all of it wasn't good. Mm-hmm. But I think the best thing I got out of that was that I've been an activist all my life, that my childhood shaped me for the work I'm doing today here in Selma and in the Black Belt. So I think that's the greatest gift anyone could have, that I'm just simply me. And talking about this history and telling my experience has been like therapy, you know, very therapeutic. That it's like a cleansing. You don't realize how much this had affected you because life just went on. No one came to try to get us back to a good place. We just, without the love of our parents and my grandparents, in my case, I don't know what we would have been, what we would have done, how we would have, what type of people we would be today. But they taught us that you didn't fight hate with hate, and that we were God's children, and that we would one day reap the benefits of the rights in these United States. And so I've been fighting it ever since, and I'll never stop.
You both saw this unfold through the eyes of a child, as young children. What would you say, Wendy, to the young kids today? What would you say to the young kids today about this moment as they see voting rights being pulled back and stripped in their neighborhoods and in their communities?
One of the things that has driven me on the path in which I share great passion for today is being a youth advocate. And I often not only interact with young people across the country, it gives me the opportunity to inspire and to motivate them and let them know that they are the voices of change. They are our voices of hope and our instruments of peace and progress. And I often tell them, and I often convey to them through trainings, the importance of being a part of the process and letting them know they're not too young. If you want to see change, you must be a part of change. So here we are today, remembering, reflecting, and recommitting ourselves on the voting rights. And we must continue to instill the hopes and the dreams. And we must not allow young people to forget that history and the shoulders in which they're standing on. So we continue to not only tell our stories, but to invite young people to be a part of this process.
Thank you, Cheyenne Webb Kreisberg and Joanne Bland. Very much appreciated.